1 in 3 will be impacted. 1 in 6 will be caregiving for somebody. So when you start to think about it like that, that doesn't mean that every third person you run into has dementia, but I want you to start thinking about it in those capacities, because if you do, it is one of the top killers out there, higher than some cancers, higher than some forms of heart disease. So it's one of those that people really don't think about.
Have you ever misplaced your keys or walked in a room and can't remember why you came in there in the first place? Well, these can be normal, but they can also be signs of Alzheimer's. I have with me today Jeremy Koerber, the program manager for the Alzheimer's Association of Greater Missouri, and he's going to be sharing with us some early warning signs of Alzheimer's, what's normal, what's not normal, and what you can do to protect your brain so that it ages healthily. I think you're going to really enjoy today's episode, and if you do, subscribe to our podcast so you get notified of our future episodes.
You're listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast with Dr. Dave Candy, St. Louis's leading expert in chronic pain relief. Dr. Candy specializes in helping women age 40 and above to overcome chronic, nagging aches and pains without medication, injections, or surgery, so they can stay active, mobile, healthy, and independent. Whether you're suffering from pain yourself or know someone who is, pain's a universal experience that affects us all, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer. Knowledge is power, and having the right information can help you or someone you love get on the road to recovery. On the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast, Dr. Candy talks with other pain experts from around the world to give you the information you need to recover, the peace of mind of knowing that you're not alone, and the hope that lasting relief from chronic pain is possible, and it doesn't require relying on pills, injections, or surgery in order to do so. So sit back, relax, and open your ears, mind, and heart, and let the healing begin.
Welcome to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Candy. I have with me here today Jeremy Koerber, the program manager for the Alzheimer's Association of Greater Missouri. And we're going to be talking about some early warning signs of Alzheimer's, what's normal age-related memory loss, and what may be a sign of something more serious. And then also some things that you can do to help keep your brain healthy through the years and age healthy. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it so much.
So first of all, can you just tell us how many people Alzheimer's actually impacts?
If you look across the nation, there's usually, the stats will flow somewhere in the ballpark range of about 6 million people on average are living with it, somewhere in the ballpark range of around 16 million unpaid caregivers taking care of these people. But I think the easy math to help people understand, this is important. So when you go to the grocery store today, or you go to the coffee shop, 1 in 3 will be impacted. 1 in 6 will be caregiving for somebody. So when you start to think about it like that, that doesn't mean that every third person you run into has dementia, but I want you to start thinking about it in those capacities, because if you do, it is one of the top killers out there, higher than some cancers, higher than some forms of heart disease. So it's one of those that people really don't think about, but it's there. It's actually something that people don't want to think about. And, there's a lot of reasons for that too.
Well, yeah, I have a couple people that I am close to that have had it in their family, remote occurrences of it in my own family. And it is just really hard to see someone go through that. So I think people tend to just block it out of their mind and hope it doesn't happen.
Right.
So that being said, what are some signs that Alzheimer's may be coming on, and what's just normal? Hey, I forgot where I put my car keys, or I walked into this room and forgot what I came here for.
I think that's an important question, because what we have through the association, and you can find this information as well at alz.org, is a list of what we call the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. Now, I always like to preface this that when we go on WebMD and we type in a symptom, it usually says one of two things. You've got a cold or you're dying. I never see anything in between there. So
or you're pregnant.
Or you're pregnant, yeah. So I like to preface, the warning signs with, this is a conversation starter, because there's a lot of reasons why someone might be feeling or experiencing this versus that. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I think the key element, and you gave a great one right there, is, you forget where you put your car keys, or you walk into the room and you're like, what did I come in here for? We've all had that. The bigger issue, even names to a certain extent, the bigger issue is when these types of memory loss start to impact life in a bigger way. Because if you forgot where you put your keys, you could probably take a moment and sit there and think to yourself, okay, I was here, I was there, and you start to retrace your steps. If you walk into a room and you are, what did I come in here for? A lot of times you leave, you go about your business, and all of a sudden, remember, you know what? I need to check this. Okay, then you got it. That's normal. And there is a certain amount of what I would call age-related memory loss that occurs as we get older. Here's where I think we start having some problems. Okay, and it's kind of an extreme example, but let's use the keys. You retrace your steps, you find your keys, good. If you open up your freezer, you want a glass of tea, it's hot outside, you're going to make some tea, and you reach into your ice box and you pull out your keys, that's weird. That's different. That's not normal. You don't normally put your keys in the ice box like that. That's a potential warning sign right there. Another really good one is what I would call memory loss, and we said that disrupts daily life. So repetition, asking the same things over and over and over again, or telling the same story over and over again. Forgetting important dates. We all forget a date here and there. We all forget an appointment every now and then, but it really is starting to impact other things. Challenges with solving problems, right? And here's where I would even take it a step further. If you or your loved one was always one of those people who, maybe they were great woodworkers, or maybe they were great, they balanced their checkbook to absolute perfection. I mean, they knew what the number was, and all of a sudden there's massive errors. There's money missing. The ability to, maybe they were a great cook and they can't follow recipes anymore. Those are the things that really, with my own grandmother, and now looking back on it, it's so easy to see, which is again one of the reasons why we're grateful you bring us on to let us talk about stuff like this. But I remember she was a phenomenal cook, and I remember going to her house and eating some meals as she was kind of moving through this progress. I'm like, this doesn't taste like it used to. Matter of fact, then when I started to kind of look at it, it was spaghetti, and Grandma made really good spaghetti. And as I looked at it, it was just noodles with like a really watery, like tomato sauce. I mean, she didn't do anything that she used to. And that was one of the first key elements right there. Aside from I started to see her show me things. Hey, look what so-and-so got us. Oh, that's great, Grandma. And she would walk around the house and she would come back around less than 5 minutes later. Hey, did you see what so-and-so gave us? Hey, that's awesome. It happened a third time. And here's the interesting thing. And this is why I said, kind of as we were, doing a little pregame here, people don't want to talk about it. I looked across the table at both of those instances, and I saw my grandfather, and he had eye contact with me, and then he looked down and he just started eating. He didn't want to have that conversation. He didn't want to admit that there was a problem. And I think to a certain extent, he was probably trying to protect Grandma and her reputation as well. But that was a massive mistake, because what ended up happening, and I mean, as far as other things that went on, decreased poor judgment, that's an issue. I mean, we all make bad decisions from time to time, but one day Grandma was supposed to have been at our house, and she showed up like 4 or 5 hours later. We asked her where she was, and she couldn't tell us where she was. So these are the reasons why we want to start having these conversations now. These 10 warning signs, it's not a absolute indictment that says if you have one or more that yes, you have dementia, because there's a lot of reasons, medication interactions, other health issues that can cause this. But if you don't get ahead of this, all dementia is progressive. So the idea would be if you can get ahead of it, there are medications at this point that don't slow progression, but it dampens symptoms. In terms of long-term care planning, in terms of, getting legal and financial documents, powers of attorney, there's reasons why we want to be doing this, aside from, and I think you might agree with this, knowledge is power. And the more you know about something, the less scary something becomes. Every day here in St. Louis, someone walks into one of our major hospitals and they walk out with news that says you have 6 months. You have less than 6 months. Alzheimer's and dementia always has the same ending. Okay. And it's not a pretty ending, but the blessing, if you want to look at it this way, is that for most people, you're talking about 8 to 10 years. So if you get ahead of the curve and you get your planning and your family knows your wishes, now living, we're always putting into our 401ks. We're planning for tomorrow. You're not planning for tomorrow anymore. You're planning for today. But that's kind of the blessing. It actually forces people to live their life a little sooner if they're brave enough to have these conversations and find out if truly this is the reason why.
Well, and I think with any type of problem, whether it's catching a cancer early or preventing heart attacks before they happen, keeping your back healthy before you injure it,
right.
Prevention is always better than fixing the problem after it occurs.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's some really neat research that's happening. If you want to just look up the U.S. Pointer study, this is where the lifestyle modification stuff comes into play. You help people for a living. So I'm pretty sure you're aware of the concept of what you do today can impact who and what you become tomorrow, 10 years from now, 20, 30. And what we've seen is that when you look at lifestyle modification, and the 4 key elements that we focus on would be nutrition, exercise, cognitive exercise, which I call the bicep curl for the brain, stretch your brain, socialization. And those are the 4 key elements right there. We could tack on smoking cessation and sleep. So what research has shown, and this came out, I think, about 2 years ago, and the exact percentages are slipping my brain right now, but if you do 4 of those 6 things on a regular basis that I talked about, the data is showing that you could reduce your risk of dementia by 59%. That's a pretty big number. And I always laugh because, we know exercise is good for everybody, but not everybody's going to exercise. So I say, okay, if you're willing to do 4 of those, maybe exercise isn't part of that, you can reduce your risk by as much as 39%. So see, that's where the numbers start to show that you can kind of get ahead of this. The American College of Sports Medicine, of all the awesome things that they list on their reasons and benefits of exercise, guess what's on there now? Reduced risk of dementia. It makes sense. More blood flow to the brain. Brain runs on oxygen. So, hey, that's a good thing. So that is kind of the charge that we also do. We talk a lot at the association in terms of what the disease is and warning signs. We have education and resources for people who are in it now, support groups, care consultation planning sessions, but we also are really big advocates and promoters of taking care of yourself for the reason of it will help you. I call it the blueprint for healthy aging. I've been in the fitness industry for now 25 years. And back in the early 2000s, I worked with a gentleman who he passed away at 96 years of age. But at 94, he was still playing golf. He was working as a maitre d' at a restaurant. He was very, very fit for a person in their early 90s. And here's what he did. I didn't know this. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought, wow, there might be something to this. He worked 2 or 3 hours a day, the lunch rush, to be social. He exercised 3 days a week. His wife made him eat very healthy, and he read books. What did we just talk about? Cognitive, nutrition, exercise, socialization. He was proving this stuff works long before they actually started doing studies on this. So again, you know as well as I do that bad stuff happens. You see people every day that exercise that still have heart attacks or still, develop cancers. That's part of the game. But what we know now is that if you do these things, you can reduce risk. By the way, it's always fun to note he didn't start exercising until he was 79 years of age. So that also is a big point, that I don't think there's a cutoff point here in terms of what this should look like. I think the message is there's help. For those who might be listening to this and say, well, I'm not there, what could I be doing? Well, here's some things that you could be doing right now as well to reduce that risk of all chronic disease states. Keep your joints healthy.
Like you were mentioning, those factors that they're good for preventing dementia, but if you eat healthy and move more and socialize and keep your brain active, you're just generally going to be healthier and happier all around.
Right. Even though my role now is slightly different from the good old fashioned fitness days, I can't take the coach out of these conversations. The point is, let's be proactive, and let's, for lack of a better phrase, I guess it's more of a football mentality. Let's get after it. Let's take charge of what we're doing with some intentional action. And I know for a lot of people that's really hard. If this sounds crazy, I've got to do all 4 of these things. Well, let's think about that for a second. If you go to Zumba, I'm an awful dancer. So if I go to a Zumba class and I start moving, my heart rate goes up. I'm trying to learn sequencing or choreography. So that means my brain is working. So there's 2 of those components down. Third aspect is maybe I'm in a room full of friends or potential friends, and I love their company. So now there's a socialization aspect. So I just knocked out 3 of the 4 components that we talked about for brain health. And then the 4th aspect would be nutrition. Drive down the street and get a smoothie when you're done. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't need to make this stuff any more complicated than what it is. As I drove my kids to school today, I'm watching people walking their dogs. Saw two gentlemen walking down the street. When I came back, they had cups of coffee in their hand. Hey, it doesn't matter to me where you're going or how you're doing it. But if you're moving more and sitting less, I think that's a big message of what we want to be talking about with the people that specifically are listening to what you do. It's a big deal.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, even though it may seem overwhelming, sometimes it just takes a few simple changes to make a really big difference. Absolutely. So if someone was interested in finding out more information, I know you have a lot of programs available through the Alzheimer's Association. What are some ways that people could find out more, or what are some programs that you have coming up?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So on June 2nd, we have a statewide initiative where we're going to be partnering with the YMCA of St. Louis and and St. Luke's Hospital. And it's called Sweat for Your Brain. So it's actually kind of a 3-part process. So in the morning, we're going to be getting some information out via social media. I'm going to be doing an interview on Fox 2 on that Tuesday morning. But the idea is that what's good for the body is good for the brain, and vice versa. So we're going to be encouraging people throughout the day to exercise. It could be in the gym. It can be in a group exercise class. It can be walking the dog. Snap a selfie. Tag the Greater Missouri chapter with the hashtag Sweat for Your Brain. We're going to see if we can get people to get a movement going here, if you will, at 9 o'clock that morning. And I can give you some more information that if you want to push out after the fact, links and whatnot. The YMCA is going to be doing a free virtual group exercise session. That's pretty cool. But at 11, we're going to be doing our healthy living for the brain and body session, which talks about those 4 components that we just kind of broke down here very, very, very hurriedly. And then we have a panel discussion afterwards that's going to include a dietitian from St. Luke's Hospital and an exercise professional from the YMCA. And we're going to be fielding questions. And I think that's important because as we provide the education for them, we're going to have questions that are going to say, well, what about salmon? Is weightlifting good? I love yoga. What game should I play? Can I read books instead? And I think those are all valid questions because what we want to do after we give that information is to now, here's the strategy. Let's get tactical. And I think that's going to be a really cool event to really get people motivated around taking better care of themselves. Another, and I'll share this with you as well if you wish to push out, on June 9, we're going to be doing at noon a small business seminar lunch and learn. We're inviting people just to grab their lunch. It's virtual. And we're going to do a very condensed version of the 10 warning signs talk because, as we said earlier, 1 in 6 people are going to be affected as a caregiver. Well, if you employ more than 6 people, it's going to impact you. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point down the line. So we want to make sure that small business owners understand how to connect and help their employees, while at the same time potentially being a resource for the communities that they serve as well. The more information they have, I always believe in that one-stop shop approach to where if someone says something to them, they might be able to help encourage or promote what we do as the association. So those are the two biggies that are coming up, and I appreciate you asking about that. That's fantastic.
Well, it's good to be able to get some of those tactical things down. It's nice when someone says, well, go lose some weight or go exercise or eat better. But that's not always intuitive. Like, well, what should I do when I get home today? Or what do I need to do when I wake up tomorrow? So that's a great resource for the community to have. If there were some other closing thoughts that you'd have for people, what would be a message you'd like to leave people with?
I think the message, and I'll kind of repeat what I said earlier today, is that my job as a program manager is to get information in the communities and raise awareness. Back when I was in the for-profit sector, my job was to raise money. Now it's to raise awareness. So I think the message that I always tell my staff that I work with and the volunteers who help us as well is that our job is to take the scary out of this disease, is to demystify it, to reduce the stigma of it, and to really encourage people that if they're feeling something that doesn't seem right to them from a memory perspective, we need to start the conversation now. We need to utilize our helpline. It's free. It's 800-272-3900. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in so many languages. I can't even begin to grasp that. That's what we call our first line of defense, Dave. Call it, ask a question. It's confidential. And so we start those conversations. It could be with a loved one, spouse, significant other, a doctor. But the most important thing is that we're having these conversations. All the other stuff that we do, support groups, all that, that's great. But to get there, we got to have the conversation here. And I believe we can help people reduce the fear, give them more power back by learning as much as they can. And then we're going to do exactly what you do at More for Life. We're going to give them the best life possible. We're going to give them as much empowerment and as much freedom as we can to live the best life that they can live. And I think that's what I would really put my stamp on right there.
Well, that's a great closing thought, Jeremy. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you live in the St. Louis area and would like Dr. Candy's help to find a solution to your pain, visit our website at stlpainexpert.com. Email Dr. Candy at dave@stlpainexpert.com or call Dr. Candy's clinical practice at 314-941-3888. If you're listening from outside the St. Louis area but would still like some help, feel free to contact us to learn more about our virtual health coaching. Regardless of where you live, please share our podcast with anyone you know who would benefit from learning more about pain and what can be done to relieve it. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast platform so you get notified when we release a new episode. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll enjoy us again soon.